Hi everybody, welcome to the Princeton Review practice exam. This is for science and it's test number 4 of 5 from this textbook. As we go through the exam video together, let's have a look at how to answer the questions, how to find the main idea in the question and then in the passage. This exam is possibly a little bit easier than the real exam that you will face because the passages are much shorter. So hopefully you manage to do this in time because time will be more of an issue for you in the real exam. Let's have a look together. So question number 1. It's quite an easy question really. We're given some information and then we're asked to complete a diagram by dragging each of these options into the correct position. And to be honest, you should be able to do this without even reading anything. The options are producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, and tertiary consumer. Well, all biomes are areas that people live, are divided into ecosystems, and ecosystems are further divided into communities, which are made up of living things that interact with one another. The ecosystem includes the living and non-living things. The biome is an area that has similar conditions. So we might be talking about, well, the ecosystem might be the desert, but the biome might be the whole of Africa. Members of the community are classified into 3 roles: producers, consumers, and decomposers. Producers make their own food. So where would producers go? Well, you should know that producers are at the first level. Primary consumers feed on the producers directly. So the primary consumers go to the next level. Secondary consumers consume the primary consumers. So they come into here. And then the tertiary consumers eat everything else. And so they go at the top. Why is this shape very good? It's not the question here, but it does come up sometimes. Why is this shape quite useful? Well, there are many organisms at the lower level, and that's where it's very wide. There are only a few organisms at the top level, and that's where it's very narrow. At each level, the organisms need to use about 90% of the energy to conduct their daily processes, their movement, their reproduction, their growth. Only 10% of the energy is stored and available to the next level. So that's why at each level there are less and less organisms, because at each level there is less and less energy being passed up. Number 2, plants produce their own energy through photosynthesis. Therefore, plants play the role of what? Producer, consumer, or decomposer? Well, plants produce their own energy. Now you should know this anyway, but we can see produce their own energy, and we have make their own food. Energy and food are the same idea. Make and produce are the same idea. So we should be looking for producer. Sometimes you will get easy questions like this, but you should make sure that you read the information carefully. Sometimes what you've learned in class might be a little bit different to the information that's presented in the exam. So even if you think that you know the answer, please do try to read the information that's given. Which of the following cannot be supported by the passage above? If an animal exhibits evolutionary adaptation over time, the adaptation is a result of predator-prey relationship. So evolutionary adaptation is because of predator-prey. B, neither the predator nor the prey evolves to be noticeably faster than the other. Neither one will get to be faster than the other one. C, both the predator and the prey adapt relative to each other, so in comparison to each other. Or D, predators and prey experience adaptation in an effort to ensure their survival. So do they adapt because they want to survive? In a predator-prey relationship, the predator eats the prey. Think about a fox and a rabbit, for example. While many people think about this relationship in regards to animals, like bears eating fish, the term also applies to animals that eat plants and plants that are eaten. For example, the rabbits eat the lettuce, which makes the rabbit the predator and the lettuce the prey. This doesn't really come up very much, but it's true. Predator is the one that eats, prey is the one that gets eaten. In any predator-prey relationship, the predator and the prey evolve alongside each other. So evolving alongside each other is the idea that they adapt relative to each other. So I think C can be proven. Consider the relationship between a tiger and a bison. The tiger needs to be able to catch the bison or it will die. So the tiger evolves whatever capabilities it needs to catch its prey, like speed, camouflage, and good senses like sight and hearing, and the capacity to debilitate, so to stop its prey. At the same time, though, the bison must adapt to be able to escape the tiger and survive. So it adapts and evolves capabilities that will allow it to avoid being caught and eaten. This might itself increase its ability to run quickly. So the tiger might get more quick, but when the tiger gets more quick, the bison also needs to get more quick to survive. Both of them need to survive. The idea that the tiger needs to catch the bison or it will die is the idea of survival. And the same is it must be able to adapt to escape and survive. So both of them need to be able to survive. So D looks like it could be a good answer, as in it is proven by the passage. Whatever the adaptations may be, they occur relative to each other. As the tiger gets faster, so does the bison and vice versa. So when one increases its speed, the other also increases its speed. So neither one gets faster than the other because they are both increasing their speed. B also looks like it is proven. Ultimately, neither one gets faster relative to each other. So again, that is B that is proven. The relation takes place in all predator-prey relationship so that neither the predator nor the prey ultimately develops an evolutionary advantage. Now, any evolutionary adaptation is the result of predator and prey? No. Some change, some adaptation is because of predator-prey. But the idea of A, if you read carefully, is if there is adaptation, the adaptation is a result of the predator-prey relationship. Always a result of the predator-prey relationship. That's not proven. There are other things that can make an animal change. Mutation, for example, can be a change. So A is not proven. B, C, and D are all directly proven by the second paragraph. A is too strong, it's too big, it's too broad to be proven. Next question asks, which of the following is not, make sure you see that word, not an example of a predator and prey evolutionary adaptation. So the evolutionary adaptation is something that helps either the predator or the prey to survive. So the species of fly mimics the black and yellow stripes of common predators like bees, wasps, and hornets. Well, this might be the idea of camouflage. If the fly is looking like a bee or a wasp, then animals that want to eat the fly might be afraid because bees and wasps can hurt. So A looks like it's an example. B, an inexperienced driver slows his average speed to avoid having an accident. This is not about evolution. This would be about learning from mistakes. So when you're learning to drive, you might go more slowly. When you're more experienced, you might go more quickly. C, Homo sapiens developed the fight or flight response to prepare to run away from big animals. Run away from big animals, this is about surviving, and developing, this is developing over time. So this is another example of evolution. And then D, skunks have adapted a chemical defense mechanism. So a defense mechanism, that would be about survival again, in the form of a spray that they can direct at potential attackers. This is a very horrible smelling spray that makes other animals run away. This would protect them. The only one that is not something that is evolutionary based, something that's evolved over time, and not about surviving an attack by another animal, would be answer B. Cycle above shows the interrelationship of different parts of an ecosystem. Which of the following can be supported by the picture? A, the burning of wood or fossil fuels generates CO2, which is used by consumers. So burning wood, can we find burning wood? Well, wood burning creates CO2 in the atmosphere. It is then used by producers. It is not used by consumers, it is used by producers. So A looks like it's wrong. B, plants and algae participate in photosynthesis that provides oxygen to consumers. So plants and algae have photosynthesis that produces oxygen for consumers. Every part of this is proven to be true. So B looks like the correct answer. C, energy from the waste of one part of the ecosystem is used for fuel in another part of the ecosystem. Well, can we see waste anywhere? We have the decomposers. Decomposers makes the detritus, which makes detrivores, which then makes cellular respiration to have CO2. I don't think that is proving to be waste. There's no clear indication that that is being used as a fuel. The fuel is here. There's no arrow going between what is produced by the decomposition to the fuel. So C is not given, whereas A is simply false and B is true. D, cellular respiration or cellular respiration on both sides of the diagram is the only means of getting CO2 in the ecosystem. Well, no, there's also burning of fossil fuels, which produces CO2. Cellular respiration is something that is there 3 times, but the other one is the burning of fossil fuels. So it's not the only way. The main way, okay, but not the only way. That's why B is the correct answer. The mode of all earthquakes during this time frame had a magnitude of what? The mode. The mode means the most common. Now, what does this table show us? This table shows us the frequency. So there were 0 earthquakes between 0 and 0.9. There were 26. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26 earthquakes that had between 1 and 1.9. There were 4,000 that had between 2 and 2.9. But the most common was 4 to 4.9 in 2005. There were 13,000 of them. In 2006, the highest number is 12,000. There were 12,000 earthquakes between 4 and 4.9. In 2007, also, the highest number is 4 to 4.9. 2008, numbers are very close. We have 12,000 and 11,000, but it is still 4 to 4.9. And 2009, there's a lot less earthquakes, but most of the earthquakes are still between 4 and 4.9. You're not looking for a number that is repeated. For example, don't look at 2 and 2 and 2. Yeah, you're not thinking, ooh, 2 is there 3 times. Not like that. You're looking how many of them. So there were 2, 1, 2. For here, there was 26. So 26 times, you have something between these numbers. Here, it is 13,917 times that there was an earthquake between 4 and 4.9. So the answer, the mode of all the earthquakes, use numbers and a dash and a dot, no spaces. So 4.0 to 4.9. If you're not clear on how a frequency table works, please do come and ask me. An atom has an equal number of protons and electrons. An ion has an imbalance between the number of protons and electrons. An ion, remember, is an atom that has gained extra electrons or lost some of the electrons. In chemistry, the main difference between an atom and an ion is that the atom is neutral, while the ion is positive or negative. Is the diagram an atom or an ion? Is it an atom or an ion? Well, we have plus, 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 plus. So we have 4 protons. We have -1, -2, -3. And if we look at the circles, there are 1, 2, 3. There are 3 electrons. So this would have a charge of +1. Therefore, this must be an ion because there is not an equal number of protons and electrons. There is not an equal number of protons and electrons. Question number 8. Which of the following can not be inferred from the passage? Not. So, not inferred from the passage, tsunamis can be caused by underwater phenomena. Wavelengths can be measured from crest to crest. Tsunamis can be caused by earthquakes that cause the seabed to move sideways, or most waves in the ocean have wavelengths of less than 100 kilometers. Well, tsunamis occur if massive amounts of water as a result of earthquakes on the seabed. So as a result of earthquakes on the seabed. Volcanic eruption above or below the water, meteor impacts, or landslides. 3 circumstances have to occur in order for the tsunami to result from a seaquake. Number 1, the quake must be higher than 7 on the Richter scale. Number 2, the seabed must, now this is very careful, the seabed must move up and down. And then number 3, the epicenter of the earthquake must be close to the surface of the earth. Now, C talks about the seabed moving sideways, not up and down. So it looks like C might be the answer that we're looking for. Can be caused by underwater phenomena in answer A. Well, the earthquake can be on the seabed. So if the earthquake is on the seabed, that is underwater. So A can be inferred from the first sentence. Continuing into the second main paragraph, tsunamis are distinct from other types of waves that occur in the ocean because of their incredible wavelengths from 100 to 3 kilometers from crest to crest. So the wavelength can be measured from crest to crest. Well, we can infer that from that sentence. And most waves in the ocean are less than 100 kilometers. Well, it says tsunamis are distinct. Distinct means different. So they are different from the other type of waves because tsunamis have wavelengths 100 to 300 kilometers. Therefore, we can guess that other waves that are not tsunami have waves that are under 100 kilometers. So C is definitely the correct answer. When Block Island Southeast Lighthouse began operating on January 1, 1874, it sat 300 feet from the edge of the cliff. So we have the cliff, and then we have the lighthouse shining their light out. From the lighthouse to the edge of the cliff was 300 feet. By 1990, that distance had been reduced to only 55 feet. So in 1874, it was 300 feet. By 1990, it was 55 feet. To figure out how long it would be before the lighthouse sat at the edge of the cliff, engineers must calculate what? Well, engineers need to calculate the average loss of distance per year. If they know in 1 year how many feet are lost, then they can go forward and work out how many more years until the lighthouse will fall down into the sea. If you know the median, that doesn't help you. The mode, well, there is no mode. We don't have enough data to work out the mode. And the range will tell us the difference between 1874 and 1990, but that won't help us to know the future when it will collapse. So, how many feet per year has it been losing? We can use a calculator, and we do need to round to the nearest tenth. So, how many years? From 1874 to 1990 would be 116 years. "300 feet minus 55 feet means 245 feet have been lost. So the average will be 245 divided by 116. Which should give us the answer 2.11. If we want to round 2.11 to the nearest tenth, that means to one decimal place, then we choose 2.1. Based on the calculations conducted in the question above, in approximately how many years will the edge of the cliff be at the edge of the lighthouse? So it is moving 2.1 feet per year. There is a distance of 55 feet. Actually, you can use speed is distance divided by time. We want to know what is the time. So the distance is 55 feet and the speed is 2.1 feet per year. 55 divided by 2.1 gives an answer of 26.190. And we need to go to the nearest year. So we can forget about the 0.190. It's lower than a half, so we go under, not over. And so the correct answer is 26. These kind of questions, please make sure you look at what you need to leave your answer in. Are you rounding to one decimal place, to 0 decimal places? You must read the question carefully. Now, this next question is continuing with the same of the previous two. Which of the following is the most likely explanation for the loss of the distance between the lighthouse and the cliff edge? So we had the cliff, and the cliff normally is next to the ocean, and the lighthouse is on top, giving the light for all the ships to see. What would be happening here? Well, rust is when metal is exposed to the air or water. This is not about a metal being exposed, it's about the land, it's about the cliff being exposed to the sea. Oxidation is when something reacts with oxygen. It could be the landslide moving down, but a landslide is normally because of heavy rain. It happens on mountains. When the heavy rain falls on the mountain, some of the mud comes down the mountain. No, this is the action of the waves on the base of the cliff. And the action of the waves on the base of the cliff erode the cliff. The correct answer is erosion. Now, which type of chemical reaction presented above takes place in the following reaction that describes electrolysis of water into oxygen and hydrogen gas? Well, we have 4 types of reaction. When 2 things become one thing, this is synthesis. When one thing is broken down into 2 separate things, this is decomposition. When we have 2 things joined together and one thing, and for example, the C and B, the one thing outside changes place with one thing inside, well, this is single replacement or single displacement, depending on which textbook you're looking at. If you have 2 things that are joined together and 2 things change places to make 2 new chemical, then we have double replacement. In this, we start with one thing and we make 2 things. We're looking at the second one. We're looking where one thing is joined together and it's broken down into 2 separate things. The answer is decomposition. The answer is B. What takes place in this reaction? We have iron and oxygen, and it creates iron oxide. One thing plus one more thing creates one thing where they are joined together. This is the first reaction. This is synthesis. Synthesis is where 2 things join together to make one thing. Next question. There are 4 primary types of tissue in the human body. And then we have a description of each of these types of tissue. The epithelial tissue covers surfaces and forms the lining. Connective tissue is responsible for protection, secretion, absorption, and filtration. Muscle tissue is responsible for movement. And then there is nerve tissue, which is for stimuli and sending nerve impulses. So, in the heart, how would these tissues work together? Well, just in case you don't know, cardiac means in the heart. So in the heart, we definitely will have muscle tissue. The muscle tissue would hold the heart in place. Well, holding something in place might be about protection. It would not be about movement. And muscle tissue is about moving. Nerve tissue pushing the blood around the body, well, the pushing would be moving. So A cannot be correct. B, the epithelial tissue would protect the chambers. Well, protection is, I think, connective tissue, not epithelial tissue. And connective tissue carrying messages from the brain would be nerve impulses. So B does not make sense. C, the muscle tissue would make the heart move. So muscle, let's clear that off there. So we'd have muscle tissue making the heart move and pump the blood. Connective tissue, holding the heart in place. Connecting the heart to the rest of the body, protecting secretion. Yeah, I think C looks like a good answer. D, the nerve tissue will carry messages from the brain. That's true, they do. And tell the heart to keep beating. And the epithelial tissue would hold the heart in place, but the epithelial tissue is not for holding things in place. Epithelial tissue is for covering a surface. So C is the correct answer. This question is tricky. You have to go through step by step and match each part of each answer to the information that you're given. And once you get one part of one answer that is not true, then you know that answer is completely not true. And you can go on to the next answer. And you repeat that process until you get something that is 100% true. Now, the figure above, looking at this one, demonstrates a negative feedback loop which the body uses to maintain homeostasis, that is equilibrium, balance. Which the following demonstrates a negative feedback loop that might occur in the body? So we have a stimulus, which means a change. We have a receptor that detects the change, that sees the change. We have input, information travels to the control center, and then output, information travels back to the body. And then we have the response to make balance. So blood sugar rises. Well, blood sugar rises would be a change to the variable. The variable would be the amount of blood, sugar in the blood. The change would be rising. If we look at answer B, the pancreas control center, well, we have control center there, and control center is the third section, not the first section. And D, we detect the change, but the change, detecting the change, is the second section, not the first section. So we can take away answer B and answer D. So now we need to look at the next level. A and C both have a stimulus in the first section. Second section, detecting the change. Receptors in the body sense the change. Okay, sensing the change, detecting the change. We have that word change and change. So A is correct for the first two. For C, returning to normal, well, returning to normal would be balance, the original level. So that would be the final state. So C is also not correct. Let's check the others. We also have the control center in the third box, which matches the control center in the third box, and returning to normal, which is the idea of balance. So the correct answer must be answer A. And when we have something like this, we just go through. We look at the first level or the first part of each one and remove the ones that are not correct for the first part. And then we look at the ones that are left, we look at the second part and remove any that are not correct. And by doing that, we very quickly remove many of the wrong answers and we find the one that is correct at every level. In the passage above, the relationship between birds and the insects that they consume is an example of what? So in ecosystems, multiple organisms live together in various different relationships. Commensalism is a term used to describe a class of relationship between two organisms in which one organism benefits the other without affecting it. But the bird eating the insect, well, the insect dies. The insect is killed. There is a huge negative effect for the insect. So this is not commensalism. Mutualism is a term used to describe a class of relationship between two organisms where they both benefit. They both benefit. Well, the insect gets eaten. The insect is not benefiting. Parasitism is a term used to describe a class of relationship between two organisms in which one organism benefits the other is harmed, while the bird is benefiting, the insect is being harmed. So, yeah, according to this passage, the best answer is parasitism. But normally, a parasite is something that lives on something else. So, for example, the worm that lives inside the intestine, or the tick that lives on the dog. But simply according to this passage, parasitism is where one organism benefits and the other is harmed. So according to that definition, the bird and the insect would be parasitism. Other passages might call that predation, where one animal eats the other animal. That would be predation. But this is a good example of why we cannot use our own idea. Predator-prey, predation, is not in this passage. It is not an option for this question. We have to use the information that we're given. And because the insect is not benefiting, it is being harmed, the only answer that would match is the relationship of parasitism. In the passage above, the relationship between birds and the grazing animals is an example of what? Well, in many ecosystems, birds prey on insects that have been unearthed by animals that graze. Okay, so the animal grazing benefits the bird. When the animal is grazing, the bird is able to get food. But the bird is doing nothing for the animals that graze. So the bird is getting a benefit. The grazing animal is getting nothing. It's not a negative, it's getting nothing. So when one organism benefits and the other is not affected, the answer is commensalism. So the correct answer for this question is commensalism. Continuing with the same passage, if it was found that the birds in the passage helped the grazing animals by eating the parasitic animals off of their fur, what would this relationship be? Well, the bird is getting a benefit because the animals are finding insects in the ground that they can eat. But now the birds are also helping the animals by eating parasites off their fur. So now they are both getting a benefit. When they both get a benefit, the correct answer is mutualism. Okay, this question is going to look at variables. Hopefully remember from the previous video that there are certain words that we can use to look for a clue for the independent variable and the dependent variable. What we are choosing to change, to vary, is going to be the independent variable. What we are going to measure or observe the change will be the dependent variable. Let's look at this experiment. Jesse is concerned about how tired his classmates seem. He created a drink that he thinks will boost their energy. His prediction, his hypothesis, is that if they drink this new drink, they will have more energy. He recruits 100 classmates with a history of tiredness. He has 50 of them drink his new special energy drink, and the other 50 drink a beverage that looks like the special energy drink, but is actually just water and food coloring. So they all think that they are drinking it, but actually only half are drinking it. This is a good experiment. The 50 that are drinking the water and food coloring are the control group. He will be able to compare those that have the new drink with the control group to see if there is a difference between the two groups. So both groups were told they were getting the special energy drink and that would boost energy. After 2 hours, 30 classmates in the first group reported having more energy, and 8 classmates in the second group reported having more energy. So, what is he choosing to change? Well, 50 of them get the new special energy drink. The other 50 get something that looks like it but is actually just water. This is what he is changing, the type of drink. So because he chooses what drink each one gets, the type of drink is the independent variable. Number of classmates, 50 and 50. This is controlled. He puts equal numbers in each group. This is not being measured. Time taken between, well, after 2 hours, 2 hours, everybody is being asked after 2 hours. That is not something that is being measured. He asks them about their energy level. So the change is the amount of energy that they have. Sometimes we can measure something by asking questions. On a scale of 1 to 10, do you have more energy? And then you can count what people say. So you can measure things accurately using scales, or you can measure things by asking people's opinions. This is an example where he asked people's opinion, but the amount of energy is the dependent variable. What can you conclude about the accuracy of the results? The results were not valid because he lied to one of the groups? No. Often, when you do an experiment, you will have a control group, and you will not want the control group to know which group they are in. So you'll have to deceive them a little bit. So you might tell everybody, some of you will get and some of you will not get. Okay, that's a way to avoid lying, because then nobody knows if they get or not. But you do not tell people that this is only water, because that might affect how they feel. B, the results were not accurate because one group only drank water while the other drank the energy drink. No, that makes the results more accurate. This is the control group, the normal group, compared to the new special energy drink group. If the new group report having more energy than the control group, then you can conclude that the special energy drink is working. So that is why this is very important to do. C, the results were accurate because one group only drank water while the other group drank the energy drink. Yes. If everybody drank the energy drink, how would you know if they have more energy than normal? You would see how much energy they have, but you would not know if that was more than normal. By having one group drink the energy drink and one group have water, you can compare. You can see the difference. So C is the correct answer. This is a very accurate experimental design because there is the control group and the experimental group. D, the results are sufficient to make definitive claims about the energy drink. Definitive claims means like a law, like very firm, like very strong claims. Well, we only have 100 people. They only drank it one time. We don't know. It might be lucky that this happened this time. It might be different next time. It might be different at different times of day. It might be different with different people. We don't know for sure. We only know this one time. So it is not enough to make definitive claims. To make it stronger, you would repeat the experiment at different times of day, and you would repeat it with different groups, and you would do it with more people. And after you get all of those results, if all of those results say the same thing, then you could make definitive claims. But it cannot make any definitive claims yet. so D is not true. Now, question 21 and 22 are looking at the difference between meiosis and mitosis. In meiosis, there's 2 successive cell divisions, but mitosis, there's only 1 cell division. Meiosis, you get 4 genetically different haploid daughter cells, where in mitosis you get 2 genetically identical diploid daughter cells. So meiosis, you get haploid cells, cells that only have half of the DNA. In mitosis, you get diploid daughter cells where they are exact copies of the parent cell. Meiosis is for making the sperm and the egg, the sex cells, the gametes. Mitosis is for making all of the other cells in the body. Meiosis occurs in animals, plants, fungi. Mitosis occurs in all organisms except viruses, which just replicate themselves. And we can continue through this table to look at the similarities and differences. We also have a diagram. Based on the table, what does the diagram represent? Well, we start with one cell, which has 2 pairs of chromosomes. We end with 4 cells. Each one has got 2 single chromosomes, and if you look, none of them are the same. Look at the mix of the black and white. They have crossed over. These will be genetically different. There are 4 of them. They are different. This is an example of meiosis. In experiment number 3, the cell undergoes what? So, in the beginning, if we have 10 chromosomes, and then at the end, there is only 5, there is half of the DNA. If you start with 10, and you get 5, but you get 4 daughter cells, what you're making is you're having meiosis. So the same here. We have 8, and at the end, there is only half. There is 4, but the number of cells is 4. For experiment number 3, it's different. Experiment number 3, we only have 2 final cells. So this is going to be mitosis, not meiosis. So we're looking at mitosis. Experiment 1 and experiment 2 were both meiosis because they end up with 4 daughter cells. But number 3 is mitosis because there are only 2 final cells. In mitosis, we get genetically identical. So if we begin with 46, then afterwards we must still have 46 because they must be identical. In meiosis, we get a half of what we began with, but in mitosis, we get exactly the same. So the correct answer is 46, mitosis. Now, as we come to this question, you might see a few things first, like X energy and An energy, that you've never seen before. Don't get worried. Even if you see things like this in a diagram that you've never seen before, it's important to go and read the passage and then think about what the question is asking. Quite likely, you're not going to need to understand every part of the text and the diagram. So let's look at the text. Energy transformation describes the process of changing one form of energy into another form of energy. So we're talking about changing energy. The law of thermodynamics states that energy cannot be created or destroyed and can only change form. So energy that goes in must also come out. It can come out as useful energy or it can come out as not useful energy, but nothing will be destroyed. Which of the following is not a type of machine that facilitates energy transformation? So, hydroelectric dam, this changes the kinetic energy of water into electric energy. So this is a type of electrical energy change. A microphone. You speak into a microphone to make sound louder. So you change electrical energy into sound energy. This has a change in energy. Electric heater. Well, it's kind of there. Electricity is changed into heat energy. Running water. Well, running water does have energy because it's moving, so there's kinetic energy. But running water, that's not a machine. We are asked for a type of machine. And running water is not changing, it's staying as kinetic energy. So D is the correct answer. Now, Jean decides to rearrange the living room and wants to move the entertainment center to a different wall. Jean pushes the entertainment center, which weighs 80 kilograms, for 10 minutes, exerting an average force of 50 newtons, but it will not move. Okay, so when she pushes by herself, even though she pushes for 10 minutes, it does not move. When Deb, her daughter, arrives home, Jean asks Deb for help moving the entertainment center. Now they use a force of 90 newtons for 5 minutes, and they are able to move the piece of furniture to the new location, which is across the room 15 feet from where it began. While they are in the process of moving it, the remote control falls off the unit and onto the floor. And we have the same 5 options, but for 4 different sentences. So when Jean is trying but failing to move the entertainment system, this is an example of, well, look at the diagram. We have Jean and she is pushing against the entertainment system. So because of her position on the floor, she is trying to push the entertainment system. She has potential energy. She has the possibility of doing work. So this is an example of potential energy. But no work is actually done because the object is not moving. But the next one, when they do it together, the moving of the system is an example of, well, we have moving, and we know that moving is always going to be kinetic energy. So the second one is kinetic energy. Then the force pushing back. Well, if you're pushing this way, there is an equal and opposite force pushing backwards on the floor. An equal and opposite force is always the force of friction. It's not the air resistance in the air, it's the friction on the floor. So the third one is friction. And then finally, the remote control drops off the unit and onto the floor. Why does it drop onto the floor? Well, it drops on the floor because of gravity. Now, work is equal to the force exerted multiplied by the distance the object moves. Before Deb arrived, how much work did Jean do? Well, before, she exerted a force of 50 newtons for 10 minutes. However, it would not move. So we are going to be multiplying by 0 because there is no distance, there is no movement. If we multiply anything by 0, we will still get 0. So it doesn't matter how much force goes in. If you multiply any force by 0, then you get 0. So the work done before Deb arrived home is 0. then when they did the work together. So we still have the work equals the force times the distance. As we look together, they exert 90 newtons of force for 5 minutes, and they are able to move the piece of furniture to its new location, which is 15 feet from where it began. So let's put the distance in. We have a distance of 15 feet. The force that's applied, well, you exert the force. So you are exerting a force of 90. So work is equal to 90 times 15, which would equal 1,350. Remember, in the exam, you do have a calculator, or you can do it on the paper. If you use a calculator, you make sure you get the right answer. If you wanted to estimate, well, if you have 15 and 90 in the correct place, 10 times 90 would be 900, so 15 is going to be more than 900. And none of the answers here are over 900 except answer D. So you can try to estimate first and then do the sum on the calculator. If your calculation and your estimation are very similar, then you are probably going to have the right answer. But for me, the first step is always write down the formula. The second step is go back to the passage and add in the numbers into the correct place, and then I can work out the answer. So the air in between two walls of a thermos is vacuum sealed, so there is no air in the space. As a result, there is little to no transfer of heat into or out of the thermos. Therefore, beverages inside the thermos maintain their initial temperature for hours. If there was air inside the wall and heat transfer was possible from the contents of the thermos to the surrounding, it would be considered what type of radiation or what type of reaction. So here's our thermos flask. Here's the vacuum in between. But according to this situation, if there is air in between the walls, well, where is the heat going from and to? It says the heat transfer is from the contents to the surrounding. So from the content to the surrounding. The energy is going out of the thermos. When energy goes out, it exits. And we know that exiting is the same as exothermic. So the thermos flask would be losing energy because the energy would be going out of the thermos. So exothermic. Now, acceleration of gravity indicates that an object in free fall will accelerate at 9.8 meters per second squared. If the time and the velocity for an object in free fall were calculated, the following pattern emerges. Keyword there is pattern. What pattern can we see? Well, after 0 seconds, we have 0 meters per second. After 1 second, we get minus 9.8. After 2, we get minus 19.6. 19.6 is the same as minus 9.8 times 2. And then 3 is minus 29.4, but that's the same as minus 9.8 times 3. And then 4 is minus 39.2, which is the same as minus 9.8 times 4. So the pattern is we take the time and we multiply by 9.8 or minus 9.8. Minus because it's falling to the ground, so it's going downwards. Now, what would the velocity of an object in free fall be after 10 seconds? Well, it must be going downwards, so we need a negative symbol, which they all have. It says after 10 seconds, well, minus 9.8 is after 1 second, so A is not correct. And then 39.2 is after 4 seconds, so that is also not correct. We need minus 9.8 times the time, which is 10 seconds, so times 10, which gives us minus 98. So the correct answer is answer D. The key here is seeing that the word pattern is in the question. If we have the word pattern, then we need to think, what is the pattern? As we look at the table, we need to look for the pattern. Once we find the pattern is the time multiplied by minus 9.8, then we can work out the answer after any unit of time. Now we have a short passage in a diagram, or a sketch from Darwin on his trip to the Galapagos Islands. A recent study shed light on the evolutionary history of Darwin's finches and has identified a gene that explains the variations in beak shape within and among the various species of the birds. All of the following might have contributed to adaptation except. So, which of these did not contribute to adaptation? Let's look at the answers and then we'll look at the passage. So answer A, rainfall impacts the size of the seeds upon which the birds feed. So the rainfall affects the seeds. So in different islands, they will eat seeds that are different sizes. B, a change in the ecosystem resulted in a change in dietary intake. So changing the environment changed what they ate. C, a new land-dwelling predator entered the ecosystem, causing the birds to nest higher in trees and use different materials to build their nests. Well, if they use different materials, they need to carry those materials. And one way that they carry material is in the beak. So that also does link to the idea of change over time. D, a species of bird becoming extinct. Well, if it's extinct, it's probably not going to change anymore. So just by looking at the answers, we might think that A and B, a change in the type of food, might mean a change in the type of beak. C, a change in what they need to carry, so maybe a change in the size, the shape, or the strength of the beak. Makes sense. But D, if something is extinct, then there is no more change. So D does not really make sense. But let's look at the passage. The diagram represents Darwin's finches, a collection of 14 species of birds that Darwin studied while traveling in the Galapagos Islands. From his study of these birds, Darwin developed the term adaptive radiation, in reference to patterns of macroevolution in which one species of animals branches off into another, different species, in order to better fit into a particular niche or habitat in an ecosystem. So there is a change. There is a change in the features of an animal because of the ecosystem where they live. Adaptive radiation is also known as divergent evolution and describes how the tree of life branches off, resulting in our planet's wide range of biodiversity. So because there is a change, because there's a change in the environment, there is a change in the feature of the organism. And this links into the idea of natural selection, where there are too many organisms to live in one place, so there is competition for resources. If there's competition for resources, then those that are better suited to their environment will be more likely to get the resources, and so they will be more likely to reproduce. And that means that the features that helped them to reproduce, to be successful, will be passed on to the next generation. So these beaks on the end of the bird would have been passed on to the next generation in those birds that had useful beaks. So if they were eating bigger seeds and they had bigger beaks, that would be useful. If they had to carry twigs higher into the trees, then they would need stronger beaks. If they were trying to get insects out of the tree, they might want narrow, longer beaks. But the beak shape would change over time according to the adaptive radiation. Well, A would change the food, so that would also change the beak. B would be a change in the ecosystem, so a change in the diet. C would also be a change in the ecosystem, and so there would be a change in the organism. D is the only one that is not going to lead to a change because the animal would already be extinct, so it cannot change anymore. Staying with the same passage, which of the following does not contribute to natural selection? So we've already talked about that. When there is overpopulation, that means there are too many organisms to live in one ecosystem. There might not be enough food or enough resources or enough shelter or enough space, but there's not enough of something. So the population is too big. There must be adaptation. Adaptation means that not all the organisms will be the same. So we can see here the big strong beak, the small beak, the narrow beak, and the middle-sized beak. If they're eating different types of animals, these different beaks could be very useful. For example, this one could maybe break open nuts. This one might be able to eat insects. This one might be able to take something out of a tree. So they would all be able to eat different things. They would all have certain advantage in different situations. So there is adaptation. Now, reproduction of adaptations means that there's a gene for this. It's not something that they learnt. It's not a behavior that will die with them. It is a hereditary trait, something that can be passed on in the genes from the mother and father to the offspring. So if that can happen, then there would be a change over time in the features of the species. The one that is not part of natural selection is answer B. There is nothing about popularization in Darwin's theory of natural selection. Now, what is the probability that the child will have dimples? When we see a question like this, we need to ask, is dimples dominant or recessive? So we have to go and look at the passage. Hereditary traits are encoded by genes that are located on chromosomes. Chromosomes come in pairs, and the pair of genes for a particular feature determines the characteristics of that trait. Traits are either dominant if they are always expressed, or recessive when you need a pair to show up, when you need two recessive genes to show up. Now, that's just general information that should be familiar because we've read something very similar in just about every exam. But the next sentence is very important. Dimples are recognized as a dominant trait. So dimples are dominant. So this would be dominant. And we're asked, what is the probability that the child will have dimples? So we're looking at this child here. So we can start by filling in the missing space. Here, we take the dominant gene from one father, and we take the recessive gene from perhaps the mother. Doesn't really matter if you put the father and the mother at the top or at the side, but we're certainly getting one dominant gene and one recessive gene. So this would have dimples, this one would have dimples, this one would not, and this one would not. The two on the bottom would not have dimples because they have two recessive genes, and dimples are a dominant gene. So the correct answer is 50%. There is a 50-50 chance, a 2 in 4 chance, that the child will have dimples. And then according to the square, what should be replaced here? Well, we've already filled it in on the previous question. It should be a capital D and a small d. So it's definitely not A and it's definitely not D. Now you might think B and C are the same, but they're not. There is one dominant and one recessive in both of B and C, but when we're doing Punnett squares, we always put the dominant trait first. We always put the capital letter first. So we must choose answer B. Now, this question is asking about the genotypic ratio. The phenotypic ratio is what is showing, so have or not have. The genotypic ratio is the different combination of genes. So let's just put in that one again. So what we have DD, one dominant, one recessive, and we have two recessive, or homozygotic recessive. We have two of those, and we have two of those. So that means that the genotypic ratio is 2 to 2. However, we like to simplify in both mathematics and science, so we would simplify that to 1 to 1. So the correct answer is the first option. On to the last passage. How could the design of this experiment be improved? They could use moles from different places in the group of test subjects. They could mark different areas of the habitat with different levels of pheromones. They could use more than one mole from each group and record each mole's movements, or they could use a real habitat rather than an observational habitat. That word different should not be there. So they could use a real habitat rather than an observational habitat. The use of certain kinds of pesticides leaves dioxins and other chemicals in the soil. Dioxins in soil might be harmful to the animals that make their habitats, their homes, under the ground. Specifically, the presence of dioxins might damage the nervous system of mammals, including the sense of smell. So a group of scientists studied the effect of dioxins in soil on the sense of smell in voles. So we are looking at the effect of the dioxins in the soil on the sense of smell. A litter of newborn moles from the same parents were raised to adulthood, then divided into two groups. Now, can you see one thing that's controlled there? They are from the same parents. Being from the same parents is good. If they had from different parents, then you might introduce an extra variable. Part of the ability to smell would be based on their genetics. Some parents would have good sense of smell, some would have a poor sense of smell. So by taking all of the moles from the same parents, they are removing one additional variable. They're trying to remove the hereditary element. So a newborn moles were raised to adulthood and then divided into two groups. A mole from one group was then moved into a special observation habitat consisting of a cubic container holding 125 feet cubed of soil with a network of pre-existing tunnels. So they've got some soil, they've put it into a special plastic box so they can see through, they can watch, and these have special tunnels. When they were making the tunnels during the construction, the scientists also placed motion sensors in the tunnels. So if the animal goes down that tunnel, the soil will vibrate and the scientists will know where the mole is. They also marked the tunnels in one portion with pheromones, with scent, with something that they can smell. So one section has a smell added to it from a different community of moles. I think the idea here is that moles would not go to make friends with moles from different communities. If they could smell that there was the scent of another community there, they would probably avoid that area and go to a clean area, go to a place where there were no other moles. So the mole was observed for a period of 1 day while it explored the habitat, and scientists recorded the tunnels that the mole entered and avoided. The mole was then returned to the group, and this process was repeated with a mole from the other group. So they do this with one mole from each group. Only one mole from each group. That could be a problem. If they use more than one mole from each group, then they could possibly compare. If they only use one from each group, then you might be observing a random difference. You might not be observing something that is repeatable. So we know that in science we like to repeat things. If we're doing it with a measurement and we repeat, then we can get an average. If we're watching where these moles go and we had 5 moles from each group and all of the moles avoided a certain area, then we would have stronger conclusions than only one mole avoiding that area, because it could be chance. So C does look like a good answer. A is definitely not the correct answer. Different levels of pheromones. So very strong, middle, and weak smell. That could possibly, but then you'll be looking at the strength of their smelling ability rather than can they smell or not smell. So there's a possibility for B. D, using a real habitat rather than an observational habitat. Well, they chose one that's 125 cubic feet, which is quite big. They also were able to put sensors in the tunnels. If they used a real habitat, then they wouldn't be able to put sensors in the tunnels. They wouldn't know accurately where the moles were going. So it would not be possible to do this with a natural observational place. What happened next? Well, each group of moles was then moved to a new habitat. The soil in the first habitat contained 0 dioxins in parts per trillion, and the soil in the second habitat contained 30,000 parts per trillion, which is consistent, the same as the levels found in contaminated soil. The moles lived in the habitats for a period of 1 year. Okay, so the moles that came from the same parents, so presumably have very similar genetic traits, and have grown up in pure soil, away from any dioxins, they are now separated into 2 groups. One group lives in an area where there are no chemicals. The other group is put to live in an area that is polluted, that has similar chemicals as scientists would find in fields where farmers have been using the pesticides containing dioxins. After the year, the test process was repeated with a new observation habitat of the same design as the first. A mole from one group was placed into the observation habitat and then tracked as it explored. It then returned to its group and the process was repeated with a mole from the other group. So again, they only use one mole from each group. The results of the first test showed that both moles explored all unmarked areas, but avoided the areas of the habitat that had been marked with a scent from a competing mole. The results of the second test showed that the mole exposed to dioxins explored the whole area, the entire habitat, and did not avoid any of the marked areas. So, what happened over the 1 year? In the beginning, they only explored the tunnels where there was no scent. They avoided the areas where there was a marked scent. But after 1 year, the mole exposed to dioxins explored the entire habitat. They did not avoid any areas. So what this experiment is showing is that the behavior of the mole changed over 1 year due to the presence of the dioxins in the soil. C is the correct answer. We're looking at, does the behavior change, yes or no? Looking at different levels of pheromones might be useful, but because they're only doing one mole, because they're not repeating the experiment, adding in an extra variable, which would be the different level of the pheromone, would make it even more difficult to say that the results were genuine and not the result of chance. So the best way to improve this experiment would be to use more than one mole. If all of the moles that had been exposed to the dioxin avoided the area that was marked, then the scientists would be able to make a stronger conclusion. Answer C is correct. Researchers infer from the experiment that moles exposed to dioxins in the soil have a reduced ability to smell territorial scent markings. So if they are exposed to dioxins, they have a reduced ability to smell. Which portion of the text supports this inference? So we need something about dioxins, and we need something about the smell, the sense of smell. So A, we have dioxins. Dioxins in soil might be harmful to the animals that make their habitats underground. Specifically, the presence of dioxins might damage the nervous system of the mammals, including the sense of smell. So A does have dioxins, it does have the sense of smell, but A is not really supporting. A is offering a suggestion, a prediction. This is not evidence. This does not support the inference. B, they also marked, they is the scientists, not the moles. They also marked the tunnels in one portion of the habitat with pheromones, with scent from a different community of moles. Well, we have the scent, but there's nothing about dioxins. So if there's nothing about dioxins, that is not going to support the inference that is made. C, a mole from one group was then moved into a special observation habitat consisting of a cubic container holding 125 feet cubed of soil with a network of pre-existing tunnels. This is a description of the process. There is nothing about dioxins, and there is nothing about smell or scent in answer C. So C we can take away very easily. B only has scent, not dioxins, so we remove that. C has neither of these key ideas from the question, so we remove that as well. D, the results of the second test showed that the mole exposed to dioxins explored the entire habitat and did not avoid any of the marked areas. Well, the marked areas were scent markings, smell markings. So we do have both the idea of smell and dioxin in answer D. And this would support the inference. This is a conclusion. This is based on an experiment. When you base something on the experiment, then you are offering evidence. You are offering support. So that is why D is the best answer. Finally, we need to put the steps of the experiment into the correct order. We have the same as some of the other tests. We have the hypothesis, we have testing the hypothesis, designing the test, collecting the data, and making a conclusion. So scientists plan. Planning means they don't do yet, so they're still designing. Scientists plan to breed two groups of moles, one exposed to dioxins and one not, and observe whether each group avoids the scent markings from other moles. This is what they plan to do. This is designing the test. Next, scientists reasoned that the dioxins were responsible for the mole which was exposed being unable to detect the scent markings from the other moles. So they reasoned, they analyzed, they made a conclusion. They're trying to explain what they saw. When you're trying to explain what you see, you're trying to draw a conclusion based on the data that you have already collected. Next one, scientists predicted, they guessed that the moles exposed to dioxins would have less ability to detect the territorial scent markings. They are guessing something. When you're guessing, you're making a hypothesis. Finally, scientists placed one mole from each group into the observable habitat. They recorded information that they saw. They recorded where they went. When you are collecting data, you are recording the data. Okay, that's the end of this explanation. I know these last three questions were quite complicated and the passage was very long. I think it's good if you do practice some longer questions like this. Sometimes you do get quite detailed questions in the GED Ready, and I'm sure that you'll get long questions in the real GED exam as well. So don't only practice the easy questions, try to push yourself and do some of these longer questions, and that will help you to prepare. It'll help you to read more quickly, it will help you to read more carefully, and it will help you with the time element in the real exam. O să lăsai, Code.